Under pressure, Archbishop Cordileone speaks out about a morals clause that's drawing fire in San Francisco. Don't go there. Republican senators warn the president against entering into a nuclear agreement with Iran.
Age of martyrs.
Plight of refugees. A Catholic delegation issues an eye-opening report after a trip to the Middle East. And no spectacle. Pope Francis points to the humble ways God acts over the course of salvation history. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, March 9th, 2015. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your News Now. The Archbishop of San Francisco stands his ground tonight. The Archdiocese is under pressure to remove morals clause from the high school staff book or handbook. Wyatt Goolsby is here tonight with more on that.
Brian, in an extensive interview with EWTN News Nightly today, Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone says he is willing to work with teachers in his archdiocese, but he will not compromise church teaching on big issues such as abortion, marriage, and contraception. He says he's asking school staff to uphold the teachings of the church.
Yes, Madam President, thank you. Supervisor Avalos.
It appears San Francisco's Board of Supervisors isn't backing down in their efforts to prevent the Archdiocese from affirming Catholic teaching. After last month's resolution calling the Archbishop's efforts discriminatory, the San Francisco Chronicle reports that city officials are considering legal action to prevent the efforts from going into effect. The debate is over plans to add language from the Catechism on a variety of moral issues into faculty handbooks. Catholic positions on abortion, marriage, and contraception are spelled out with the expectation that teachers will not publicly contradict church teaching in school.
It's not a matter of what they do in their private lives. How are we going to know that anyway? We don't know what they're going to be doing in their private lives. If their private life becomes public, well, then that's another issue.
The Archbishop says it's the same with any organization that wants its employees to uphold its values.
To that effect, teachers have drafted the following petition.
But for several hundred San Francisco area faculty, that's not good enough. They've started a petition against the additions. The group of teachers says the clauses are an attack on teachers' labor and civil rights. Archbishop Cordileone says the efforts are not meant to target anyone. He says he will work with faculty to rework the additions without going against church teaching.
Certainly that's our constitutional right. Our country was founded on the right, among other things, of the free exercise of religion, and that's what we're seeking to do, to exercise that right for the good of everyone in our community.
Several Catholic and non-Catholic organizations have come out in defense of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. One online petition in support of the Archbishop has more than 25,000 signatures. Brian.
Thank you, Wyatt Goolsby. And now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Political tensions rise over the Obama administration's nuclear talks with Iran. Senate Republicans bypass the White House and directly urge Iranian leaders not to strike a deal with the administration. Chief White House correspondent Susanne LaFrankie has more.
Brian, Republicans are warning Iran that if they cut a nuclear deal with the Obama administration, it's one that will not last. The strategy is twofold: to discourage the regime from signing any agreement and to also pressure the White House into giving Congress a seat at the table. Nuclear inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency were back in Tehran, keeping close tabs on Iran's evolving nuclear program. Back in Washington, 47 Republican senators warned in an open letter to Iranian leaders that any deal with this administration would be temporary. They warned the next president could revoke such an executive agreement with the stroke of a pen, and future Congresses could modify the terms of the agreement at any time.
Hopefully this letter can remind the Iranians that they, despite this division, there's a desire to show unity and there's a desire to show resolve and purpose.
The White House says the letter only undermines sensitive international talks and is not the role the founding fathers envisioned for Congress.
I would describe this letter as the continuation of a partisan strategy to undermine the president's ability to conduct foreign policy and advance our national security interests around the globe.
Democrats fear if these negotiations fail, a military response to Iran becomes more likely. The U.S. and other nations are seeking a pact that would let Western powers verify that Iran will not obtain a nuclear weapon. But Benanam Talabu says there is precedence for congressional approval and that no deal is better than a bad deal.
We need to show that we're not afraid to walk away from the table. We need to underline that for Iran, that Iranians have more to gain, and we are not afraid to walk away.
Iran continues to insist its nuclear program is peaceful and only aimed at producing energy. The next negotiations are scheduled for March 15th. There remain wide divisions between the two sides. Brian?
Thank you, Susanne LaFrankie at the White House. The Supreme Court orders an appeals court to take another look at the University of Notre Dame's challenge to the HHS mandate. The mandate requires coverage for contraceptives and abortifacients in employer health plans. The federal appeals court in Chicago had ruled against Notre Dame, which specifically challenged the so-called accommodation. Now, that was before the Supreme Court decided the Hobby Lobby case in favor of some corporations with similar objections. Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker signs a right-to-work bill into law effective immediately. That measure prohibits requiring a worker to pay union dues. 4 years ago, Wisconsin ended collective bargaining for most public sector workers. Walker, a potential Republican presidential candidate, survived a recall election after that and has since been reelected. 4 people with suspected links to a January terror attack in Paris are in custody tonight. Authorities say one of the suspects is a police officer. All 4 were allegedly connected with the man who killed 4 hostages at a kosher deli in Paris. He was shot and killed by police. That attack followed a shooting spree at the offices of the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. Troops from Chad and Niger have moved into northeast Nigeria to defend against Boko Haram terrorists. This marks the second front in the region against the Islamic extremist group. According to some reports, Boko Haram killed about 10,000 people last year alone. The group has carried out mass kidnappings, including the abduction of schoolgirls. The escalation in a joint military campaign comes just weeks before Nigerian elections, which many fear may turn violent. The body of Cardinal Edward Egan is received at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City today. The former New York Archbishop died on Thursday. He was known as a humble, gifted scholar, passionate about education. A public visitation comes after a private viewing for Egan's family and Cardinal Timothy Dolan. A vigil mass will be celebrated tonight. The Mass of Christian Burial is tomorrow at St. Patrick's. It will be broadcast live on EWTN at 2 p.m. Eastern. Pope Francis reminds the faithful we cannot fool Jesus. During a visit to a parish in Rome, the Holy Father said we can't act like saints in church and pagans in our daily lives. He says Jesus knows us from within. Francis met with children of that parish. He took some of their questions. One kid asked about the existence of hell. Francis explained, hell is for those who decide they don't need God or his mercy. The Bishop of Rome also met with the parish council and pastoral workers at that parish. In his homily this morning, Pope Francis says God works in humility, not in spectacles. From today's readings, Pope Francis highlights some ways God acts simply. He says, the Lord creates man with mud, not a magic wand. It was little David with only a sling and the stones who beat Goliath. And what did the Magi find when looking for a great king? A little child, a manger. The 50th anniversary of a turning point in American civil rights history was marked this weekend in Alabama. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led marchers across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. That struggle turned a corner when they crossed that bridge on what's known as Bloody Sunday. Dozens of marchers began a 54-mile trek from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama this morning, retracing the steps taken by civil rights activists 50 years ago. On March 7, 1965, activists trying to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge were met with police wielding billy clubs and tear gas. The aim of the march was equal voting rights for all Americans.
What we're going through today is absolutely nothing, and I understand we may get some rain, but it's absolutely nothing at all compared to what the people, endured 50 years ago.
Today's march was small in comparison to this weekend's activities in Selma and Montgomery. The two cities linked by an ugly but important chapter in American civil rights history, a chapter that led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act. President Obama and more than 100 Republican and Democratic lawmakers were there commemorating the day. 50 years ago, Congressman John Lewis was beaten on that bridge.
We must use this moment to recommit ourselves to do all we can to finish the work. There's still work left to be done.
Mary Zachary worked in Alabama in the 1960s and literally got marching orders from Dr. King.
We were always informed when Dr. King was coming in to visit us and where he was living, and gave us instructions for the future and how to follow them, how to march, and how to try to stay safe.
The demonstrators will march about 10 miles each day before taking a break. Other events are planned throughout this week, marking the anniversary. Coming up, a woman who works in the Vatican explains the role women play in the life of the Church. And Pope Francis meets with members of a lay movement celebrating a milestone. Humility saves man. Pride makes him lose his way. That from the Twitter account of Pope Francis today. Thanks for joining us on this Monday evening in the third week of Lent. I'm Brian Patrick. A world where women are marginalized is a sterile world. The comment from Pope Francis at his Angelus address on Sunday, which was International Women's Day. The Pope says women...
Le donne non solo portano la vita, ma ci trasmettono la capacità di vedere oltre.
The Pope says women not only bring life, but they transmit the capacity to see beyond. The head of the women's section in the Pontifical Council for the Laity spoke with our Catherine Szeltner today about the role of women in the Church.
Anna Christina, you're a consecrated laywoman working in the Vatican. What can you tell us about your work there?
Well, I work here as the head of the women's section of the Pontifical Council for the Laity. This is an office that exists since the 70s and works, I like to describe it easily, like a sort of think tank, gathering knowledge about women's vocation in the Church and in society, and thinking about all the issues of the changing lives of women on behalf of the Holy See, and making all that knowledge available for the Holy See to work with in the different arenas, in the different environments where it has work to do.
The Church does a lot for women, but women do a lot for the Church. A new report says the number of women working in the Vatican has nearly doubled in the past 10 years. In your opinion, why is it important that women work in the Vatican?
Well, it is very important because there is this richness, this complementarity of gifts that come together when men and women work together, and that has become very present in many environments in society, in politics, in economy, in the professional arenas in different areas. And it is more and more happening inside the Vatican that works at the service of the Holy Father, so that professional women come and work together with men and give their different point of view, enriches a lot the work that the Holy See can do at the service of the Holy Father. So I think this news of this report is something we have to be happy about and to welcome, because as the report stated, many of this percentage of women are professional women. So this growth is not only a number, but it's also meaningful because it's a growth of professional women working at the service of the Holy Father. And I think that enriches a lot the mission of the Holy See.
So for those Catholic women who aren't working in the Vatican, what role can they play in the Church, in your view?
Oh, huge role. Obviously, working in the Vatican is one way, but it's not the only one, nor even the most important. As important as the Vatican is, the Church is not reduced to its institutions. The Church is the presence of Jesus Christ, of His love, of His mercy worldwide. So the role of women in every place where they are, whether it be in the workplace or in their families, in education, or in any professional environment where they are, and they can witness to their own love for Jesus Christ, is a presence of the Church and is bringing the Church closer to the people, no? To those peripheries of life that Pope Francis so often calls us to go to. So I think it is very important for any Catholic woman to think in prayer and to meditate in the presence of God. How can they, with their own gifts and with their own faith, enrich in the place where they are and help, as the Holy Father said in the Angelus prayer yesterday, where he greeted women for International Women's Day. He said that women help create a society that is more human. So in any environment where women are present, they can be the presence of the Church, creating a society that is more human, and that can give a lot to society and therefore to the Church as well.
Anna Christina, it's great to hear from you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And thanks to Catherine. An estimated 80,000 members of the lay movement Communion and Liberation filled St. Peter's Square on Saturday. Pope Francis greeted members from about 50 countries. They came to Rome to honor Father Luigi Giussani. They're celebrating the 60th anniversary of the movement that Father Giussani founded. The Pope spoke about the group's vital mission, bringing all people into encounter with Christ. Up next, commemorating 50 years since the celebration of the first non-Latin Mass. And the former Olympic site at Lake Placid offers a unique winter sport thrill. An urgent prayer request tonight for members of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul in Syria. They've been kidnapped along with their families, their wives, and their children. An EWTN Facebook post has been shared more than 42,000 times, reaching about 4 million people. And of course, we join our prayers with yours tonight. Thank you for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. 50 years after the first Mass was offered in the language of the people, the vernacular, Pope Francis returns to the church where that actually happened 50 years ago. On March 7th, 1965, Pope Paul VI celebrated Mass in Italian. That was the first non-Latin Mass. This was celebrated in Rome's Church of All Saints. Pope Francis was there Saturday, commemorating this dramatic change in the liturgy. The worldwide shift to saying Mass in the vernacular, or the language of that region, was approved, of course, by Vatican II. Noelle Hiester is a lecturer in evangelization and catechesis at the Graduate School at Cristendom College. So this was a huge shift for the church to have Mass celebrated not in Latin, but in the language that we spoke. How did that change impact the church over these past 50 years?
Well, I think the first thing for a lot of people is that it felt much closer to them, and they felt much more connected with the Mass, because before the priest had his back to them, he was speaking in a language they didn't understand, and a lot of people hadn't been taught very well what was going on in the Mass. So there was a connectedness a lot of people felt. I don't know that the impact is all positive. There are some other aspects to that are a little bit different. So part of bringing it closer meant that the mysterious aspect of God was sometimes denied or ignored a little bit. So people who today like the extraordinary form of the Mass like that aspect rather than that closeness aspect that they have with the Mass being in their language that they understand.
Yeah, the motu proprio from Pope Benedict some years back actually brought back that traditional Mass, which I remember, by the way. I served at the Tridentine Mass, and I remember that we were taught all the Latin. This was such a tradition in the church. Why do you think such a major change was made at Vatican II?
Well, this had been something the church had been talking about for over 50 years, even before Vatican II. Not necessarily bringing the language of the people into the liturgy, but the fact that the people seemed disconnected. Even as early as 1903, Pius X had talked about seeking more active participation in the Mass. So it wasn't a change that happened overnight, really, at Vatican II, but there had been a lot of discussions leading up to it. There were some changes that Vatican II recognized were not necessary, but made sense, such as the readings. The readings prior to then were in Latin also, and of course, if you don't understand any Latin, you're not going to understand the readings, and what is most important, that people understand the scriptures that are being proclaimed to them. So they started with looking at, let's start with the scriptures, first of all. And then eventually, as they looked at the documents from Vatican II, they sort of expanded more and more and more the use of the people's native language in the Mass.
This was just one major change out of Vatican II. Can you sum up, I guess, the entire Vatican Council? I know that this is hard to do in a short time, but just, you know, what was supposed to happen out of Vatican II, and has it?
That's a big question. Well, if we look at the liturgical document, the phrase that comes out of that would be the most important to remember is fully conscious and active participation. So what they were looking for was to make some changes that were generally necessary, hopefully the phrase that they use is organic, sort of growing out of what was already there, but that would enable people to more fully participate in the Mass, more consciously and fully participate. The question of participation, or that active participation, though, is one of not necessarily a physical activity in the Mass. Sometimes we think we need to be getting up and down and doing a lot of things, but as St. Paul says, making up what is lacking the sacrifice of Christ in ourselves. That is connecting ourselves, offering ourselves with the sacrifice that's being offered at the Mass.
That's beautifully put. And I know many young people are very into the Tridentine Mass, and they're able to participate in a way that maybe I wasn't able to as a kid because I didn't understand, but as an adult who chooses to celebrate Mass that way. So it's a great gift that that Mass is available.
It is. One thing to keep in mind, though, and you're right, they're choosing this versus everybody was going to it before, and that a lot of them have a very beautiful and richer understanding of what the Mass is, so they appreciate all of the beauty, all of the ritual of the Tridentine Mass in a way that perhaps the great majority of people didn't appreciate it before. One of the things that I think perhaps we haven't done as well as we could coming out of Vatican II is the catechesis, or the teaching people to understand the Mass. Sometimes we think they just go to Mass and they're going to understand exactly what's going on, especially because it's in English. And in reality, there's always an element of the Mass that will be incomprehensible because it's worship of God, who is other. Exactly.
Yeah, but hopefully we're doing better with that now. Thank you, Noelle Hiester with the Cristendom College Graduate School. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Well, the site of the 1980 Winter Olympics at Lake Placid offers the public a rare chance to try skeleton sledding. Catherine Szeltner takes us on a ride.
Mike, here we go, Matt. Ice looks different flashing by your face at 30 miles an hour.
It was just fast.
I mean, you're only inches from the ice.
At the site of the 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, people can pay to ride belly down, face first on a skeleton run.
They'll get to 30 or 40 miles an hour. On this track, we get, close to 70 miles an hour Olympic level. So they're going about half the distance, therefore about half the speed.
No straps, no seat. A sled only slightly bigger than a doormat. But the 40-second thrill is worth it to those brave enough to try.
It was so fast. It was much faster than I thought, much scarier than I thought. It was great.
Riders looking for something a little more contained can choose the bobsled, where speeds can reach 60 miles an hour. Money from the rides help keep the facilities that train Olympians up and running. The skeleton rides also give people a taste of a lesser-known winter sport.
You can go tobogganing or sledding, and it's not the same thing. So this will be a once-in-a-lifetime kind of experience.
Skeleton is more for those who like their thrills close to the bone. Catherine Szeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
It looks like a lot of fun, but I'd rather see spring come. Well, the Vatican hopes to recover a letter written by the Renaissance artist Michelangelo. It was stolen from the Vatican archives in 1997. The letter is in Michelangelo's handwriting, and it is signed by him, according to one Italian daily. The Vatican refused an offer to pay for the letter's return as Vatican police continue to investigate. Thanks for putting up with my lack of voice. I hope by tomorrow it'll be better. Until tomorrow, we encourage you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. Really grateful to our EWTN News Nightly team. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. God bless you.